Hello everyone. Now recently I've been running a lot more dungeons on my healer and trying to gear him out, and I've started noticing and realizing that at these lower levels at Heroic and Mythic Zeros, there are a lot of deaths and wipes that are completely unnecessary. So today let's go over the leading causes of deaths and wipes in any group, be it 5-man or any raid size that you might have. Now, the large majority of deaths happen because of a failure of mechanics. Now, what I mean by this is I see a lot of people stand in fires, get debuffs they shouldn't be getting, take unnecessary damage. A large majority of the times, this unnecessary damage is very high and leads to their death. There have been way too many times where I see people just stand in fire. There might be an ability that telegraphs onto the ground, it might be a pool of fire, it might be a dancing rune weapon, whatever it might be, it telegraphs onto the ground, and for some reason, people just don't move out of it. And the easy thing to do is to just go ahead and blame your healer for not healing you through that damage, but in reality, every healer has a maximum HPS that they can put out that's dependent on their gear and their class. And what we have to understand is that the healer's priority is keeping the tank up. If the tank dies, it's an automatic wipe. If 1 DPS goes down, it's not an automatic wipe. Something else to note is if someone is taking unnecessary damage, it's probably unlikely and very difficult to heal them through that unnecessary damage. If we take Trilliax in Nighthold as an example, in Heroic mode, anyone standing in the Annihilation Beam will be one shot, which is impossible to heal through and is due to a failure of mechanics. Now let's go over the big overarching tips and advice in order to avoid as many wipes and as many deaths as possible. Now for tanks, tank positioning is a big part of this. The tanks need to face the mob away from the group, but the mob also has to be close enough for ranged DPS to reach it, and close enough for the healers to be able to reach the tanks. Something else to be noted is that there should always be a clear area behind or around the boss for your melee DPS to be able to stand in and do damage. Again, going back to the Trilliax example, if you don't move Trilliax around and position Trilliax correctly, then melee will be standing on arcane puddles or be standing in front of Trilliax when the arcane slash goes off, leading to dead DPSers. So it's also a tank's responsibility to give everybody in the raid the proper environment to be able to avoid mechanics. Something else I've also seen a lot at lower levels is the tanks simply not knowing their rotation. Being a prot warrior, I have a firm understanding of what tanking should look like on a prot warrior, and there have been quite a few times where I see prot warrior tanks or even druid bear tanks with a full rage bar and never using any of it at all. Now I am fully aware that rage has to be used in order to mitigate correctly. So again, something else that can lead to wipes is a tank not knowing how to properly tank, knowing their rotation and knowing how to actively mitigate all of the damage incoming. The reason this leads to a wipe is one of two reasons. Either the tank can go down, which causes a wipe because nobody else can take that damage, or the tank is simply soaking up every single global cooldown and all of the time of the healer because the healer is having to overheal that tank that everybody else around the tank will eventually die from slow AoE or cleave damage. Now the next point is something we touched on briefly. Ranged DPS and melee should not stand in front of any enemies, and they should also never stand in anything on the ground unless it's known to be a beneficial effect. In other words, don't stand in fire. Now moving on to healers, a big one that I don't see enough healers do well is dispels. If there is a debuff that goes out that has very high damage and needs to be dispelled, it is very important for it to be dispelled as soon as possible. Every global cooldown that goes that's not used on a dispel is a waste of a global cooldown and leads to very high damage on whoever's receiving that debuff. In any raid or any party size, there should not be a lot of movement whenever the combat starts. Movement should be limited to when only necessary, and it should never be too sporadic. Sporadic movement and unnecessary movement leads to a loss in DPS, which could lead to an enrage timer. So again, only move if absolutely necessary, and try to keep it constant and not too sporadic. The next point is to do your research. Now there is an adventure journal which is now built into World of Warcraft that gives you a very brief summary of exactly what fight you're about to encounter. Now it's important to read over this just to have a very basic idea of each encounter, but just in case you do go down, there is now that nice recap button that lets you see exactly what killed you directly, whether it was a dot, a mob, an ability, what exactly hit you, how hard it hit you, which you can then prepare for the next time. We also have to understand that the healer's priority is keeping up the tank, and as a result of that, every DPS should actually have some personal cooldown ready to go in the event that the tank takes heavy damage and starts sucking up all of the resources of the healer. It is not the healer's responsibility for them to heal anyone who is actively failing at mechanics. So for example, if you died by standing in a fire, even if that fire ticks for only 10% of your damage, and it took 10 ticks to kill you, the healer is not responsible for carrying you for failing the mechanic and standing in the fire. So it's very good to be aware of mechanics and do them accordingly. On the topic of jobs, it is the tank's job and responsibility to give everyone ample space to do their job. That means enough space for the melee DPS to stand and keep DPSing, and enough DPS for any ranged and healers to deal with any mechanics that they might have to at a distance, while still having enough range to the mobs or to the tank in order to DPS or heal them. But that does it for this overview. Let me know if you guys have any other tips to avoid very common wipes. I know pugging gets a little frustrating sometimes, but it's good to see people from different skill levels collaborating and trying to complete a task. So if there's anything else you guys would like to add, go ahead and add them in the comment section down below. I will be responding and I will pin anything that's very important. But as always, good luck out there.